Good evening. Tonight we begin with a set of numbers that arrived in the regular, official way they do now, released by Ukraine's General Staff, dated January 21st. These are not numbers presented with flourish or commentary. They are delivered plainly. They are delivered as accounting. From January 20th to January 21st, according to that report, Russian forces are estimated to have suffered 1,170 casualties. That is the central figure. Everything else tonight flows outward from that. The report also states that Ukrainian forces destroyed 8 Russian tanks during that same period. 8 tanks. That number sits there quietly on the page. Alongside it, 70 artillery systems, and more than 1,000 drones, more than 1,000. There is no emphasis added by the report itself, no adjectives, no framing, just the count. The General Staff's update also places these figures into a larger ledger, updating the cumulative Russian combat losses recorded since the start of the invasion. Not this week, not this month, since the beginning. That framing matters because it is not dramatic language. It is administrative language. And when you read it closely, you can feel the weight carried by that restraint. These are the numbers, the report seems to say. Nothing more. And when numbers are presented this way, it changes how they land. Because 1,170 casualties in a single day is not presented as a headline. It is presented as a daily entry, a line item, something logged and filed and added to what came before. There is something quietly unsettling about that. The report does not specify individual locations. It does not describe movements on a map. It simply states what Ukrainian forces say occurred during that 24-hour period. 8 tanks destroyed, 70 artillery systems, more than 1,000 drones. Each category stands alone. Each category is counted the same way, and the language does not rise or fall depending on the size of the number. More than 1,000 drones is written with the same flat tone as 8 tanks. Which, in its own way, tells you something. Because 1,000 is usually the number that makes people pause. It is usually the number that demands explanation. Here, it is just recorded. The report also makes clear that these figures are estimates. That matters. They are not presented as theatrical certainty. They are presented as professional assessment. Estimated losses. Estimated destruction. Again, no embellishment. And that is important, because what Ukraine's General Staff is doing here is not arguing. It is documenting. It is maintaining a running account of what it says Russian forces have lost since the invasion began. And this particular update, dated January 21st, adds one more day to that account. 1 day. 24 hours. From January 20th to January 21st. Within that window, 1,170 casualties. That number alone could dominate the conversation. But the report does not isolate it. It places it alongside equipment losses, treating personnel and machines as parallel columns in the same ledger. Tanks, artillery systems, drones. And by doing that, it communicates something without ever stating it outright. That modern conflict is measured in categories, and that those categories are tracked relentlessly. One of the striking aspects of this update is what it does not do. It does not compare today's numbers to yesterday's. It does not tell you whether this represents an increase or a decrease. It does not draw a conclusion. It simply updates the totals. This is what was reported, the document effectively says, and so we are left to sit with the numbers as they are. A short quote that could be spoken here, that feels true without adding anything, might sound like this. These numbers don't speak loudly. They just stay. And they do stay. They remain on the page. They remain in the record. As of January 21st, the Ukrainian General Staff says Russian forces incurred those losses during that one-day span, and that the cumulative figures since the invasion have been updated accordingly. No commentary about what comes next. No signal about what tomorrow might bring. Just the present tense, captured and preserved. And that brings us to the deeper narrative inside this report, which is not about movement or momentum, but about continuity. Because the act of issuing these updates, day after day, is itself a form of communication. It tells the audience that this accounting is ongoing, that it has not paused, that there is, every day, another set of numbers waiting to be added. And tonight, those numbers are 1,170 casualties, 8 tanks, 70 artillery systems, and more than 1,000 drones. That is the setup. That is the context. And now, we need to look more closely at how this kind of reporting functions, and what it means to maintain a record like this over time, without commentary, without adjectives, and without deviation. When you read this update carefully, what stands out is not just the scale of the numbers, but the method. Ukraine's General Staff is not offering analysis here. It is not offering interpretation. It is offering a record. This particular report covers a single day, January 20th to January 21st. That time frame is precise. It is closed. Nothing bleeds in from before or after. Within those 24 hours, the report estimates 1,170 Russian casualties. That number does not come with a breakdown. It does not distinguish between categories. It is presented whole. And then the report moves on. 8 tanks destroyed, 70 artillery systems destroyed, more than 1,000 drones destroyed. Each line stands on its own. Each is separated, but none is elevated above the others. There is something deliberate in that structure, because when you remove emphasis, you force attention onto the act of counting itself. The report does not say where the tanks were destroyed. It does not say how the drones were brought down. It does not describe conditions, terrain, or tactics. It simply states that these losses occurred, as estimated by Ukrainian forces, during that specific period. And then it situates those figures within the larger cumulative totals since the invasion began. That phrase matters. Since the start of the invasion. The report reminds the reader that this is not a standalone document. It is one entry in a long sequence. Every update builds on the last. Every day adds weight to what is already recorded. And this update, dated January 21st, explicitly says that it provides updated figures of Russian combat losses since that beginning point. Not revised figures, not reinterpreted figures, updated figures. Which tells you that the accounting is ongoing, continuous, and methodical. There is no rhetorical flourish in that. It is procedural language. And procedural language, in this context, carries a different kind of gravity, because procedure implies repetition. It implies that yesterday had its numbers, and tomorrow will have its numbers too. This one-day window is treated as routine. That may be the most striking element of all. Because 1,170 casualties in a single day is not framed as exceptional here. It is framed as reportable. The destruction of 8 tanks is not described as a turning point. It is described as a fact. 70 artillery systems. More than 1,000 drones. Again, no adjectives. The phrase "more than" appears only once attached to the drone count. And even there, it does not invite reflection. It simply acknowledges that the figure crosses a threshold. More than 1,000. That is all. The report does not linger. It does not contextualize what drones mean in this conflict. It does not compare them to tanks or artillery systems. It counts them. This kind of reporting asks the audience to meet it where it is. There is no guidance offered on how to feel. The General Staff does not tell you whether these losses are significant, devastating, or expected. It does not say whether they represent progress or cost. It just updates the ledger. This is what we have recorded, the structure implies. And that implication is powerful precisely because it is restrained. A short on-air quote that fits this moment might be, This is what the page says today. Because that is exactly what this update is. It is what the page says today. Nothing more. The update's role is not to persuade. It is to maintain continuity. Each figure reinforces the idea that this accounting will continue, day after day, using the same format. And that consistency matters. Because consistency creates credibility through repetition, not argument. The audience learns what to expect: a date, a time frame, an estimated casualty figure, equipment losses by category, and then an acknowledgement that the cumulative totals since the invasion have been adjusted accordingly. That is the pattern. And this report follows it precisely. There is also something important about what is not individualized. Casualties are presented as a single number. Equipment losses are presented as totals. No names, no units, no personal details. This is not narrative in the conventional sense. It is accounting. And accounting, when repeated over time, becomes its own form of communication. The January 21st update does not stand apart from previous updates. It fits into a series, which means it is designed to be read alongside others, not in isolation. The General Staff is effectively saying, this day matters because every day is counted. And the figures from January 20th to January 21st are now part of that cumulative record. Again, the report does not pause to reflect on what that cumulative number has reached. It simply notes that the totals have been updated. That restraint ensures that the meaning remains fixed to the numbers themselves. No added meaning, no extracted lesson, just documentation. And that documentation serves a specific function. It preserves a version of events as understood by Ukrainian forces at that moment in time. An estimate, yes, but an estimate presented consistently, using the same categories over and over, which allows the record to be tracked longitudinally without shifting definitions. 8 tanks today mean the same thing as 8 tanks yesterday. 70 artillery systems are counted the same way they were last week. More than 1,000 drones are recorded without elaboration. And so the audience learns to read these updates not for drama, but for accumulation. One day adds another layer. This update adds January 20 to January 21st. That is its contribution. And it closes without commentary. No concluding sentence, no summary, just the acknowledgement that these figures update the totals since the invasion began. A quiet ending. A procedural ending. And in that quietness, there is a sense of continuation. A sense that tomorrow there will be another update, another date, another set of numbers. And they will be presented the same way. A second brief quote, one that stays within the facts, might be, "The count goes on," because that is what the report communicates. The count goes on. And with that understanding, we can now move toward the final portion of this script, which brings this update to a close, not by adding meaning, but by recognizing what it represents as a complete entry in an ongoing record. What Ukraine's General Staff has done here is complete a full cycle. It has identified a time frame, January 20th to January 21st. It has estimated losses within that frame, and it has incorporated those losses into the cumulative totals recorded since the start of the invasion. That is the entire function of this report. There is no conclusion offered beyond that, which means the conclusion belongs to the act itself. Because closing an update like this is not about interpretation. It is about confirmation. Confirmation that this day has now been logged. The 1,170 estimated casualties are now part of the record. The 8 tanks are now part of the record. The 70 artillery systems are now part of the record. The more than 1,000 drones are now part of the record. Nothing in the report suggests that these numbers are final in any philosophical sense. They are final in a procedural sense. They are closed for that day. And that distinction matters. Because procedural finality is different from narrative finality. This update does not aim to resolve anything. It does not aim to explain anything. It aims to ensure that January 20th to January 21st is not left blank, that there is no gap, that continuity is maintained. When the General Staff states that these figures update Russian combat losses since the invasion began, it is reaffirming the structure of the record. Every new update reaches backward and forward at the same time. Backward because it adds to what is already there. Forward because it implies there will be more. That is not speculation. That is simply how a running ledger works. And this ledger is built one day at a time. The language used never shifts tone. Estimated casualties remain estimated casualties. Destroyed equipment remains destroyed equipment. The categories remain unchanged. Tanks are tanks. Artillery systems are artillery systems. Drones are drones. The consistency itself becomes the message. A short, emotionally resonant line that fits here, without adding anything, might be, "This is how the day is remembered." Because that is what this update does. It defines how that day is recorded, not how it is felt, not how it is interpreted, how it is recorded. And there is a quiet finality in that. Once the update is issued, January 20th to January 21st no longer exists as an open interval in the General Staff's accounting. It is closed. The numbers are set. They may be referenced later. They may be aggregated later. But this entry stands as its own. The report does not revisit earlier days. It does not revise them here. It simply adds, which tells us that the purpose of this communication is not persuasion. It is maintenance. Maintenance of a consistent public-facing record. And maintenance, in a context like this, requires discipline. The discipline not to editorialize. The discipline not to highlight. The discipline not to dramatize. That discipline is visible in the way the report ends. There is no flourish at the close, no sentence that sums up the meaning of the losses. Just the statement that the figures have been updated since the invasion began. That is where it stops. And stopping there is a choice, because it leaves the audience with the numbers themselves. It leaves them with the understanding that this is one day among many, that this update does not stand alone, that tomorrow's update will likely follow the same format, using the same language and serving the same function. There is also an implicit acknowledgement in this structure that memory is being constructed through repetition, not through narrative arcs, not through climactic moments, through accumulation, one day at a time. January 21st joins the dates before it, and the figures attached to it become part of the larger total. That is the only claim the report makes, and it makes it clearly. If there is emotion here, it comes not from adjectives, but from scale. More than 1,000 drones in a single day. 70 artillery systems. 8 tanks. 1,170 casualties. Each number is finite. Each number is contained. Together, they form a snapshot, not a moving picture, a still frame. And the stillness is intentional. The report does not move you forward. It anchors you in a specific moment and then closes the file. Another brief quote, spoken quietly, might be, "The record holds." Because that is what this update ensures. The record holds. It holds January 21st. It holds the figures associated with that date. And it holds them without commentary. As a result, the meaning of this update is inseparable from its form. It is an official report issued by Ukraine's General Staff stating estimated Russian losses over a defined period and updating cumulative totals since the invasion began. Nothing more, nothing less. That is the complete function. And with that function fulfilled, the update ends. Not with resolution, but with closure. Closure of the day, closure of the entry, and readiness for the next one. That is where we leave it tonight. This report stands complete, as issued, as written, and as recorded.